Greetings to you. Now, Canon's newest lens is the RF 16-28 f2.8 IS STM. It just came out recently. It follows the design pattern very closely to the RF 28-70 f2.8. Almost identical, not quite if you look at the specs, but it might as well be. We've talked about this before, but this form factor could be kind of like a dream travel kit. Now, I own the 24-105 f4, the 70-200 f4, and after waiting what feels like for an eternity, I haven't pulled the trigger on this lens quite yet, but I might finally go in on it for my wide zoom. It's not perfect, so I wanted to come on here and talk through my decision making. It's priced at $1,149 US, and that's about what we should have expected. Sony's, more or less equivalent lens, the 16-25 f2.8, is priced at $1,198. This probably won't be the last of these types of lenses that we see in this form factor, kind of built in this archetype, not explicitly L lenses, but sort of having the promise of similar quality. They are weather sealed, so that's a big selling point for me personally. And for this design, instead of sacrificing the constant aperture, here we have that constant f2.8. Canon ditches the dedicated focus ring here, and the aperture ranges are pared down from what we would typically see on some of the Trinity lenses. So obviously with this one on the widest end, we're jumping from the 15 on the Trinity lens to the 16 on this lens. It doesn't sound too great, but if you're really into that ultra wide angle, that can make a difference. And then on the long end, true fans of the 35 are going to be kind of missing something here. 28-35 is a big jump. That probably cuts a lot of people out of wanting this lens right from the start. But if you are one of the people that can live with that, then I think this starts to become more appealing. Also, this zoom to start functionality is another compromise that we're making here. And this is something that I think I'll really hate, like a lot, but it's tough to know without fully trying it myself. And a few other things we know. I will typically go to James Reeder's channel for kind of an idea of quality, lens image quality. I'm not huge on this stuff, I'll explain in a moment, but I think he does a pretty good job of splitting the difference between, real world comparisons, but taking a deeper look than what I would do on my channel for sure. If you're not new to this channel, I personally don't do too much of that testing myself. And so I kind of think two things. You can get those comparisons elsewhere. You can get them done better and more thoroughly than I can do them. I've got a tiny little channel and I don't really have broad lens access. I also don't like shooting them that much. And then the second thing is assuming the image quality isn't super bad or like incredibly standout or noteworthy, it just more boils down to your needs and what's available for any given mount that you have. And so that I mean really I don't think the marginal differences in image quality matter to most shooters as much as getting the right lens for the job matters, the job and budget. As an example, let's take the 15-35 as a comparison. Obviously, the 16-28 and 15-35, neither of them suck. So it's more about what you want to spend, what you want to carry around, the focal range that you need, and what else you already kind of have. By that point, after considering all these things one after another, most people are going to have a clear answer. And if not, if image quality is truly your number one criterion, then at that point, you can kind of pixel peep looking for a tie break. That's just kind of how I've been approaching it, mostly as a travel and landscape photographer who also makes some content. I think it can be helpful to know ahead of time where in the range a lens might perform best or worst, or where across the frame. But I think for most people, most of the time, we're probably too worried about this. There is increasingly debate around under-designed image corners and then correcting them with profiles. Ideally, we wouldn't be creating lenses like that to a huge extent, but if the final images look good and that enables some of these smaller builds on these newer zooms, then I'm not personally too worried about it. And so for me, I haven't pulled the trigger on this, but I think the play is going to be to buy this, to try it for a long, considerable time, probably for the rest of the year, and then just consider reselling it if I'm not loving it. I've got two goals with a lens like this. A, it's to get something more versatile than what I already have in my kit right now. And for me, that means the focal length range. I'm shooting this right now on the 28. Versatility also means how many scenarios can I bring just this lens or just this lens in another and still feel like I'm pretty prepared and ready to have a good time. And then B, I want to be more compact and lighter than I am right now. And so this Sigma 28 adapted is about the same size and weight as the 15-35. I don't like lugging that around. I do when I have to, but hiking and travel is kind of my most favorite photography. So ending up with something like this that can fill out a larger focal length range would be pretty cool. So for as long as I've had this big hole in the wide end of my kit, I've basically been, when in doubt, waiting it out. Because I think, eventually I'll get the 15 to 35, right? But I was kind of always unwilling to spend that $2,300 on it. I was growing more and more frustrated with Canon's speed and lack of third-party support. Basically not wanting to go deeper into this ecosystem, voting with my dollar, as they say. In the meantime, I had the 35mm macro. It was feeling kind of tight sometimes, especially outside. That's when I decided to pick up this Sigma 28mm f1.4 and just kind of split the difference between 35 and 24 and call it a day. And then I kind of fell in love with this 28, which made thinking about how I'd consolidate the kit on the wide end a little bit tougher. I think for so long I assumed that I would replace this when going with the 15 to 35. And particularly, the f1.4 is alluring for things like Astro. It's nice for the talking head. I rarely shoot fully wide open 1.4 for this shot because it's too bright, but it's going to be hard to give some of those things up. The more I consider giving this up, the less I actually want to. It's not like I have a ton of money tied up in it. I don't think it's going to resell for all that much. So it's not like I can roll that into an expensive lens too easily. The way I think about it now, this hole in the kit, is that this lens is probably going to stay. Like I said, I like it for the focal length of the talking head. Sometimes it's a little too tight for landscape, right? I like that 24 for that single wide shot sometimes. But 28 is also easier for me to compose than 24 as well. So there's a lot to like. I like the Milky Way at 28, and I don't spend a lot of time shooting Astro, but I do like it. And this focal length and aperture is kind of the killer combo there. I'm going to assume that this 28 is staying. And then I'm thinking about how other potential options compare to this 16 to 28 if I were to add this in. If we look at some of the other options, I can kind of talk through my thinking. RF 15 to 35 f2.8, big, heavy, expensive, kind of old at this point even. Like I said, it's the more or less the footprint of this 28 adapted, and I don't want more of that when I'm doing my favorite shooting on hikes. It's not that unsimilar to hiking and traveling with the 51.2 that I just experienced. That was a really good rental because it kind of solidified for me like, hey, I love that lens. I dreamed about probably adding that as a flagship prime for a really long time. After trying it out, I haven't completely ruled it out, but I think for the stuff that I love right now, it's not the best fit. And I think I'll probably have similar doubts if I go with this. Now, the RF 14 to 35 has the best focal range. That 14 to 15, 15 to 16, those are kind of big jumps. And so that would be cool to have occasionally. I had a 14 prime, didn't love it because I was constrained to 14, but did like it and used the iPhone super wide quite often, which I think is around there. It's just that I don't like using, kind of after year 1 or 2 of having a phone, I don't love using it for photography nearly as much because the battery is typically, more or less shot at that point. And I'm using it for all sorts of other things. And so I like to keep the battery fresh. Use it in a pinch, but not too often. When I'm thinking about versatility for this lens, the big strike is f4. Now, normally I consider that mainly an advantage. It's why you can get probably this focal range packed into this form factor at this price. At the same time, I think I'm just going to leave this behind on some of those trips where I only want to take one lens. That's where I think the 16 to 28 really excels. You can get away with some Astro here. You can get a shallower depth of field. And, I think I'll miss that if I'm just trying to go super lean with a 1 or 2 lens setup here. Basically, I would always be packing it with the Sigma 28, and I'm trying to get to a point where I can leave this behind occasionally. I like 35. 35 is something I'm relatively familiar with and used for a long time. It's a lot less versatile. So from a form factor perspective, it has a strong advantage here over the 28. But it would still leave 24 as my widest focal length on my 24 to 105. So this doesn't get me much in that way. And I think I would regret it for some of the things that I've praised this 28 for. The biggest plus in going with one of these primes is that they're a little bit better in kind of some of the harshest conditions. So when I went to the Great Sand Dunes, I did not mess with these external zooms, did not want to fill them with sand. It was a good choice. I'll never, ever get the sand out of this tripod. And the camera, when you're coming out of there, does look sandblasted. You kind of carefully want to brush all the sand out of the gaskets and stuff before you're repacking your ear and things like that. So maybe there's an advantage to getting, okay, could you go down to the 24? And I just don't love this for the talking head angle. It's a little too wide, a little wider than I like. Again, I like it for the single shot, but over the 28, I think you gain some form factor advantage, but kind of less versatile in all the areas that I want to improve upon. So, and still not wider than 24 itself. So that's kind of where I'm ruling out these current VCM lenses. Even if they make a 28 millimeter version of this, I'm not super on board. It doesn't get me any increased versatility other than the form factor in this lens. But from a focal range perspective, still kind of stuck there. If they make a 20, that's more intriguing. It's a length I would like to explore. I could probably live with 20 being as wide as I ever need to go. However, I'm not super comfortable, probably wouldn't jump into that. And again, kind of it leaves me with 28 and 20, always kind of packing both. And then my hesitations on the 16 are that it's not weather sealed. Like I said, I kind of struggled with just the 14 prime, a little tighter, but still overall, I mean, you can tell I'm just more inclined to the flexibility of a zoom in this range. So I wouldn't even be interested in the 16 VCM either, if and when it exists. I'm not sure how you feel, but personally, I've officially given up hope for Canon third-party full frame. I'm not excited by it. I'm not planning on it. And if it happens, maybe a nice bonus, but I'm just not going to count on that. And at some point, I will probably move my Samyang 85, potentially in favor of the 50 VCM, but we'll see. So if you sum up all of that thinking, the 16 to 28 is probably the answer. Again, I think it's just unfortunate, at least for me, and kind of my preconceived notion that this zoom to start I will not like. Now, the one last thing I mentioned was making this choice in the context of looking ahead to my next body. Again, if you're new, as soon as it was clear that Canon was dragging their feet in RF land many years ago now at this point, I tried really, really hard not to overcommit into this full kit. And so kind of like go with a great intermediate kit that was good for me, but not go head first on the flagship lenses. And I think that strategy is going to pay off because at this point, I have a kit that works pretty good for me, and I'm not feeling stuck in the ecosystem at all. With the right lens or two to start, I think I could do a lot of damage on a new system while still having a relatively complete set here. So I won't be doing any switching. This R6, I'm going to run into the absolute ground if it takes 10 years. But specifically, when I mentioned the hesitations around the RF 15 to 35, it's kind of like, hey, if I end up on the E mount, their 16 to 35 Mark II is newer, lighter, smaller, and would make a really good, really great first lens on that system. And just obviously beyond that, they have more choice, kind of an abundance of choice really. And so those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about when I pass over this lens for now as well. But to be very clear, that's kind of a moot point until I rent another system, see how it feels. And if I add an additional body in the next year or 2 or 3, I think it makes sense to wait a bit longer and then really go with the expensive glass once I've solidified what that second body is going to be. And I think there's still more than a 50% chance that it's an R6, an R5 line, at which time I think we're going to have even more lens choice here. And it probably makes sense to stick Canon, but we'll see. And we've got one more topic for today, and that's dealing with creative block. And if you got this far, welcome. I've tricked you into listening to my video podcast. This is called The Upload Iceberg, where I talk about the behind the scenes of growing my photo YouTube channel here. I'm Dan. This is episode 19, the 4,500 subscriber milestone. Glad to have you. Now, I don't love the idea of making a video on the channel titled something like, "Where have I been?" Or at least I don't want to do that in the future moving forward as much. That's actually one of the reasons to have a podcast, to talk about this stuff. That's completely unrelated from main channel upload. It's been 3, maybe 4 months at this point since my last upload, and life was just getting hard, New work, new space, traveling back from Colorado, playing so much pond hockey that it was becoming a problem. Classic excuses, kind of. It's funny from this side of the camera because each and every day since that upload, I've spent tons of time thinking about YouTube between this channel, various work projects. It's just that the time here spent on my own channel wasn't a period that was super productive in delivering an outcome, obviously. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to package my last photos that I took in Colorado into a video. So lots of script writing and rewriting and more still to do, but soon. I definitely fell into the trap of making one single video feel a bit too precious. I had some really wonderful hiking and shooting experiences there at the end after wrapping up that 50mm f1.2 video and sending that lens back. And I like what I got to shoot, but it wasn't shot with the concept and title and thumbnail in mind from the start. And that's how you end up in YouTube hell, so be careful out there. The tentative title is 3 photo tips that you already know but don't follow, or something like that. I'm feeling more unblocked on that creatively, but we'll see how quickly I can rework that script for a final time. Let's do a quick unstructured look at analytics so you can see how a channel like mine suffers when you don't upload for 3 to 4 months. So everything is down in recent history, like you might expect, but it's not completely dead, and it pains me not to see the upload icon in the last 90 days. So if we come out to 365, I last posted November 27th, 2024. And there's a slight decline here in views, you can see, but kind of relatively flat. That's typically because I have most of my traffic based in search. For videos that do well, they typically do well for many months or a few years. And that provides a pretty stable base of views. And so this is probably roughly baseline over this entire period. And like this extra up here is what I would get on my channel from browse and suggested. But I have kind of a beefy search base. If we look at the last 48 hours, I don't have a lot of recent content ranking up here. So maybe the most recent callouts here are the newest podcast episodes, some of the newer podcast episodes here that I've built with the intention of kind of putting them out as videos, like videos first. That's how I've structured this one. I'll probably talk about that at some point. And then also the recent 50mm f1.2 video will get, a bump here or there. If you want to know more about what I thought about the 28 many years ago, almost 2 years ago, I tried to do it justice back then, but I've used it much more since. And yeah, I think you can see some of these like heavier hitter videos prove the point that if you go out and try to make one of the best videos in any given topic, and you do get it to sort of rank, you can get it to a position of, really staying top of mind in YouTube or top of mind for viewers on YouTube for a long time. And so, I've opened this one up. I don't like to chase too many vanity metrics, but I'm excited to see when this hits 100,000 views. That'll be kind of just a cool first milestone for the channel here. It's just interesting to conceptualize that many people seeing something that you've made, and ideally something that was hopefully entertaining or helpful for 7.5 minutes of their time. This video, I don't know that it will get there, honestly. Canon's released the 70-200Z version of this lens. So A, I think this lens is less relevant. B, I think it faces more competition. It's probably not quite as good or quite as satisfying for people searching this comparison. Also, this is one that, in the beginning, you can kind of see it in the graph. This is on a slightly different trajectory here than it was here. And you can tell by the click-through rate. This day, Jared Polin released his video comparison here. And so for this period of time, I was one of the only videos on YouTube with this comparison, or at least like somewhat quality comparison. And I enjoyed a little bit of a head start without very much competition for this video whatsoever. So not sure that this one will make it, but we'll see. Other than that, nothing super intriguing to cover without a whole bunch of new content coming out. Subscriber growth is kind of slow and steady as usual. Welcome if you're new. I could be wrong, but I'm beginning to think that I'll need to make more videos and or better videos to change this growth rate drastically. Who would have thought? This has been the Upload Iceberg, episode 19. Next podcast episode comes out at 4,750 subscribers. Next video comes out, let's hope, real soon. Later.